Thanks for coming back to the final session of the series, It's Not Easy. So far, we've talked about 3 of the 4 cornerstones of identity for the Israelites of the Bible. They all begin with the letter T to help in remembering them. The Israelites all belong to the same tribe and trace their origins back to Abraham, who was called by God in Genesis 12. They were tied to a territory, land promised to Abraham and his descendants throughout the story, and they came together to worship God at a centralized structure in Jerusalem called the Temple. And now we're going to dive into the 4th identifier, and arguably it's the most important thing that made Israel distinctly Israel. Our last of the T's is Torah, or Torah. In our previous exercise, we read from Exodus 20, when we matched the Little League rulebook to its corresponding text. Verse 12 starts, "Honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor." Many of you might recognize these words. They come from a rather famous list of rules given to ancient Israel, better known as the 10 Commandments. We're probably more familiar with seeing them like this, or like this with Moses holding them, because the book of Exodus relates that after coming out of slavery in Egypt, God speaks to the people through Moses, giving them the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. He next gives Moses a whole host of other laws, which go on for chapters, and in chapter 31, Moses receives the 2 tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. So what does all this have to do with Torah? If you think of the Bibles that many of us have as more like a bookshelf containing many books, it can be pictured like this, where each book of the Bible is a volume on a shelf. Now keep in mind that folks in Catholic or Eastern Orthodox traditions would have more books on their shelves, but I'd like to keep it simpler just for now. On a shelf in the Christian tradition, volumes that are somewhat similar can be grouped together into sections, like history or poetry or gospels. In the Jewish tradition, the New Testament portion of the bookshelf isn't there at all. Their Bible, the Hebrew Scriptures, contains the same books as what we call our Old Testament, but they are ordered differently and arranged into different sections, which makes their bookshelf look like the picture on the left. They divide up their books into just 3 sections, law or Torah, prophets or neviim, because the word for prophet in Hebrew is nevi, or writings or ketuvim, because the word to write is katav in Hebrew. You can see that in either bookshelf, the first section contains the same 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in both bookshelves, this first section is labeled law or Torah. This is why many people who hear the Hebrew word Torah think of those first 5 books labeled law. And that's partially right, but there's actually more to it. Torah can also be understood as not just those first 5 books of the Bible, but it can also mean the entire set of instruction that God gave the Israelites, the entirety of the Scriptures. It can also encompass other instructions that God gave them that weren't even written down, known as the oral Torah. But whether it's used narrowly, as in those first 5 books, or more broadly than that, when many of us hear the word Torah, we associate that with the idea of law. I'd like to dive into that a little bit, though, because law is just too weak a word to describe all that the concept of Torah is holding. The word Torah actually comes from a Hebrew word, Yara, which is a verb meaning to throw or to cast or to shoot, especially like an arrow. It can also mean to aim a finger at in order to point something out. So the word Yara comes to us from the world of archery. It entails having a target in view, or maybe pointing out that target to an archer, and then the archer picks up his or her bow, loads it with an arrow, and attempts to, as closely as possible, hit their mark. This isn't easy to do, as any archer could tell you, I'm sure. It takes practice, but even more so, I think it takes instruction. Now, I've never tried to shoot an arrow, but it seems that the instruction to do so is a rather hands-on kind of thing. Rookies need to be shown by close contact how to hold the bow and just how much to draw the string back. Look at how closely these teachers' words are to their students' ears. They are concerned to transmit their direction clearly, and they are stooping down to get as close as they need to. My boy, your wrist isn't exactly at the right angle. Let me show you. Your left hand is slightly off. Let me gently press against that to show you what I mean. It takes a whole lot of hands-on, intimate, patient instruction to teach someone how to hit their mark. Now bring this understanding of Yara, the archery term, into the Hebrew word Torah. As the Lord gives Torah to his people, he has only their good in mind. He sees the pitfalls before them, and he'd like them to avoid all that. He knows that adultery and greed and worshiping other gods leads to strife, and he doesn't want that for them. He knows that loving him and loving others leads to life and peace, and that's the mark that he's teaching them to aim at. With hands on, close to the ear, meant for their good, guidelines. With patience and compassion, being slow to anger and abounding in love, God is bending down from his high, high place to give them Torah, his loving instruction. It actually kind of saddens me when I think about how we translate this rich and vibrant concept of Torah as law. Those familiar with the Torah can tell you that there are 613 commandments that it contains. 365 of them are thou shalt not things, things you shouldn't do, leaving 248 commands outlining the things that you should. People have had differing opinions about which commandment was the most important, and we actually get to listen in on someone asking Jesus his opinion about this in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12. Let's pick it up in verse 28. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," answered Jesus, "is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." Let's take a closer look at Jesus' answer. Jesus isn't pulling his response out of thin air. He's actually quoting Deuteronomy 6, 4-5, a centerpiece verse for all of Judaism. This bit of text is so important, it's even been given its own name, the Shema, after its first word in Hebrew, Shema, which means hear and obey. I've circled that word in a red oval so you can find it, remembering that Hebrew is read from right to left. So Jesus is 100% in line with most of his hearers when he points to Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5 as the most important commandment. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The real innovation comes in what Jesus says next. He pulls from Leviticus 19:18, saying that the command to love God must be paired with its companion, to love your neighbor as yourself. That wasn't as widely accepted, but that's the teaching he's putting forth. So how did this teacher of the law, this expert in the Torah, evaluate Jesus' conclusion regarding the greatest of the 613 commandments? "Well said, teacher," the man replied. "You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart and with all your understanding and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." And Jesus likewise gives the expert an attaboy. And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." Discussions and debates about the Torah went on all the time among both the learned and the average people. Why, you ask? Because Torah was critically important to how the people of the Bible saw themselves and their place in God's story. Torah, along with tribe, territory, and temple, are the four cornerstones which work to define the identity of the ancient Israelites. If you want to understand more about the people that you're encountering in the Bible, you've got to be aware of how these four factors are guiding what they do and how they see their world. So thanks for coming along on this short journey into the Bible text. I hope you've noticed something new in the landscape, or maybe even a fresh way to view territory that you've covered many times before. Whatever the case, it's good to have you along for the trip. You never know what we might discover as we crack open this fascinating text together.